Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 3 of Duffington Talks. We're now 3 weeks into the podcast, which is absolutely really been fun to read for and keep this up because I'm really enjoying doing this podcast. And now we have the first sort of continuation story, as last week we touched on Trump's imminent arrest or supposedly imminent arrest, and it didn't happen. However, we did see the reaction we were sort of expecting. We saw um, a lot of people come out in defence of it. So, we're gonna touch upon that in this podcast. We're also going to touch on very briefly what's happening in Israel, and then we're going to talk. The main story of the week is talking about the decision to exclude transgender athletes from competing in the female category in the Olympics. And following on from that, almost on the same day, we had the news that a research proposal from a scientist from King's College London was rejected for the use of terminology and inherent bias. I think is the second reason. So we'll get into that later, but we'll start off with the man, the myth, the legend, Donald Trump, who said, "I'm going to be arrested. Go out and protest." And we didn't see protests, or not to my knowledge. We didn't see physical protests, I should say. We saw a lot of social media protesting. Twitter, um, Twitter came out swinging um, from both sides. We had MSNBC saying that Trump is recruiting domestic terrorists to protest his arrest, um, which was interesting. And then we had Taylor Greene, who came out with her arms swinging in defense of Trump, um, and saying about how the silent majority hate communist Democrats. So basically the American right came out in defense on social media, and it sort of deterred the Democratic, like, not deterred, maybe the wrong word, but it definitely would have put the pressure on, because they came out and they were saying that it's politically motivated, sort of along the same lines of what Trump said, um, and they were accusing the district attorney of like leading a politically motivated investigation, and then this sort of um, I don't know, put the pressure on the grand jury that was meeting, the Manhattan grand jury that was meeting to discuss the case. Then um, was postponed, and I mean, it's not. I've read that it's not uncommon to be postponed, but essentially, the district attorney's office um, said uh, that the sort of um, pressure that's being put on them marks an unprecedented inquiry into a pending local investigation, to quote, that would interfere with the grand jury's proceedings in violation of the law. These confidentiality provisions exist to protect the interests of various participants in the criminal process, the defendant, the witness, and members of the grand jury, as well as the integrity of the grand jury proceeding itself. That's from the DA's General Counsel, 23rd of March, to a group of House Republicans, as a group of House Republicans demanded that Mr. Bragg's testimony to Congress. So they're putting the pressure on both sides, putting the pressure on, I guess, with MSNBC and the left saying that Trump's recruiting terrorists, and the right saying that the Democrats are communists and trying to arrest Trump. It is really kicking off, and it's setting up, the campaign narrative for the next presidential election. Already, we're seeing this stark divide in the country at the moment, but in America, not this country specifically, in America, very, very stark divide. That is, I don't know. I don't know how one goes about targeting this, because I don't see it being very, very easy to unite this really, really deep deep mess, deeply divided country. Yeah, it is, and I don't know what it's going to take, and it's going to take more than a new leader to the country. It's going to take a lot of reform that they're not really out to sort of want to do. The Americans don't really like reforming too much, and they really, really need to make the reforms, because the country, it's only going to get worse, I think, at the moment, and that is a serious issue, that needs to be addressed. So we'll, keep up to date with this story. Again, it does certainly look like the Trump's case moves on, and an arrest looks on the cards, because they're hearing more and more testimony, and they're delaying it because they want to take the heat off. Obviously, with Trump saying, "I'm going to be arrested on this day," it may have been, their plan may have been not on that day specifically, but close to that day. So they just want to take the heat off a bit, and have less pressure on them. And so we'll keep up to date with that. And the second sort of more minor story that I wanted to talk about is what's happening in Israel. There was a protest last night to get rid of Netanyahu, who is the president of Israel. Or is he prime minister? Actually, he's prime minister. That's my mistake. Error number one of many I'm pretty sure people can find. Not too familiar with the Israeli system, to be honest, but I do know that Netanyahu, who I always sort of, but not popular. I think he was he stepped down and came back again. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because it's interesting that basically what they're protesting over, because Netanyahu's government wanted to basically make the government more in control of selecting judges, for example, because they don't like the Supreme Court, and the Parliament. Is it the Knesset or Knesset, which is the Israeli Parliament? Doesn't have there's not much, or not many checks and balances on both the Supreme Court and the Parliament, by the looks of things. And if I'm not mistaken, Netanyahu, or I think a lot of Israeli politics recently has been like sort of very dependent on coalitions, and so Netanyahu, who probably has a large party, but obviously is in a coalition, wants the government to just have more power in making long-term decisions that help long-term. And the country didn't like that. I mean, they're protesting outside his house. They really, really were putting the pressure on him, and it's interesting to see because I think we've had protesters from sort of everywhere in the country, which this is the reason why I wanted to bring it up, is because it's interesting to see that you have protests from both sides of a divide, and the sort of the effect that it's had on a country, because I think protesting at the moment, it's very, very there's been a lot of protests recently, and you had the airport, I think, had to close. McDonald's closing its rail branches in strike action, because of a general strike. So you've got a whole bunch of strike going on, and whilst this is obviously striking for a specific reason, I think we can certainly sort of look at what's happening with the government unpopularity in Israel and say that and say that, this sort of thing, it could very much happen in the UK. And that's why, I wanted to bring it up, because I think that um, this sort of government unpopularity, is very high. And obviously, not an expert in Israeli politics, but I can understand that with, the current world situation coming out of the post-COVID world, and just general frustration that a lot of people will be feeling with a lot of situations. And if things aren't going to get better, sort of by way of what's happening with who's in power, they're going to turn and take their frustration out on someone. And in Israel, that might be, these reforms that want to just give the government more power. In the UK, I think certainly the Conservatives are under a lot of, heavy threat at the moment. We've had series of strikes after strikes from all sorts of from different walks of life. And so, we haven't seen the level of a general strike that was called on the same level that was called in Tel Aviv, but sort of similar. If things keep getting worse in Britain, with inflation sneaking up again, this could be on the cards. And I think it's important to look elsewhere. I mean, they're protesting in France as well. And so, this is a general trend of protesting at the moment. That's quite interesting to see. Really take hold. And apparently, this is the 11th week of protesting. But now it's sort of really hit the news, because some of the images that I saw this morning were really interesting to see. So, if anyone is, more of an expert than I on Israeli politics, I'd be happy to learn more about that situation. But I think that, it's interesting for us to be alert of that, because of the sort of ramifications that can have on the wider sentiment of protesting in Europe, especially. So now on to the main story of today's podcast. World Athletics bans transgender women from competing in female world ranking events. So that was laid out, 5-6 days ago now. And the first thing I want to do is I want to touch on what is actually being said. Because, well, for a start, they're saying this is going to be updated. It comes into play 31st of March, which is in a couple of days, and they are setting up essentially a research group to keep this discussion open. But essentially, the terminology that I've got from this is the BBC website, their opening paragraph. The governing body's president, Lord Coe, said no transgender athlete who had gone through male puberty would be permitted to compete in female world ranking competitions. Because obviously the main focus here is testosterone levels, and the previous rule was that transgender women had to keep their testosterone to the same level as those that had to keep their testosterone to a maximum of 5 nanomoles per liter, if I'm not mistaken, from is it 5 nmol / liter L? I think that's per liter, I'm assuming. Not very good with the measurement system. And the same thing with DSD, so the difference in sex development, like Caster Semenya, the South African runner, who has a higher level of testosterone. So that's obviously something that people are born with. Where if you think people transitioning, they're actively transitioning, whereas these people have this condition. They also had to, or Caster Semenya was told that she had to take she had to reduce her testosterone levels, so she had to take, or she refused to take testosterone suppressants, because her testosterone was deemed to be too high, and and they've reduced the level to below 2.5 nanomoles per liter, down from 5, and must remain under this threshold for 2 years in order to compete internationally in the female category. So, essentially, it's a crackdown, not just obviously on transgender athletes, but on testosterone levels in the women's sport is what they've done, and none of the 13 athletics athletes that have their DSD will be able to compete in the athletics championships in Budapest in August, but they're eligible for future events, including the Paris 2024 Olympics, if they maintain their testosterone level at the required level. So it's affecting a wide range of people, but obviously, to do our job properly, to start on the main wording. So we have no transgender athlete who's gone through male puberty. So presuming that someone transitioned before puberty, and I don't know the rates of, I don't know how many athletes have done that. Probably, not many with the sort of age we have at the moment. I don't think that, I can't name one, but in a hypothetical world, I'm assuming then that someone that's transitioned pre-puberty would be allowed by this rule to compete in an athletics competition. So this is the rule. I mean, they're saying that they're taking the line alongside sort of swimming and rugby, I think, or other sports where this decision has been made. So we have swimming that is decision to make the competition more fair. We had the Rugby Football League and Rugby Football Union ban transgender women from competing in female-only forms of their game. So it's, and triathlons created an open category in which transgender athletes can compete. So we have the sort of the movement, as it were, is that they're rebounding the female category because that they believe that in these cases that it's currently getting too unfair in their approach, and so they're adjusting their definitions, and this was met with criticism. Tom Daley was furious at FINA, with the people that the swimming governing body, who made the decision to stop transgender athletes from competing in women's races if they've gone through male puberty. So the athletics and swimming are sort of running on the same lines now. Focus on puberty and testosterone levels. Now, the first things first. Are we looking to just make a decision without providing an alternative, or are we looking to make a decision and having an alternative that even maybe short term? Are we going to create because again, this is the sort of issue, is that, well, we're saying what's wrong and we're not providing any solutions with what's wrong, and that's generally a very bad way to go about things. That's what I'm seeing at the moment. I'm seeing I'm seeing an issue arising, and I'm not seeing a solution. I'm not seeing many people suggesting a solution. So actually, interestingly, last year an article in The Economist suggested, quite interestingly, that essentially they're going along the same line that this decision is taken now from the athletics committee. They suggested, I think they were talking about swimming, because I think this is when swimming was in the debate, or they just say sport in general. I don't think they don't actually give a specification, but what they uh, what they suggest is that they get rid of men and women's categories, and you have open category, which is the fluid category, and female category, which is restricted on the basis of biology. So the female category would essentially be the sort of one that's capped, where you have like a capped testosterone level to compete in that category, and the open category anyone can compete in it. Now that is a solution. I think it's the first solution I've seen. I don't think it's a very good one because, well, I don't think it's a very good one because it comes in a very short article. It's not schematized. It's just one paragraph, one sentence that said, "Oh, that this is a good way to go." And so I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring here. And I mean, there have been suggestions. That's not to say that nobody's talking about suggestions. However, I think the most important thing to say is that these suggestions are not coming from your typical media sources. The suggestions are really coming from new media. First off, you've got the people that are straight attacking the decision. You've got people that are saying that there should be a third category. Obviously, I've seen this open category, but I just wanted to have, actual articles. The news have running this very, very sort of sturdy line, which is either they just stay reporting on it, and show that the none of these people really have a solution, or like The Economist. I mean, this was last year, but to do with the same issue, that they throw their hat in the ring with a suggestion. Well, the first things first, there are different things you can do, and I look at the sort of Paralympics as an example of how you can have multi-category sports. So, for example, if your issue, we can weigh up the options here. We have an open category and a female category. Let's take, The Economist's suggestion. Now, the open category may need to have subdivisions because I honestly, I'm not an expert at the moment, but I'm not an expert on athletics, but I can't see Casta Semenya running with, when she runs 400 meters. If she runs with the men in the 400 meters, I don't know her times off by heart, but I would be surprised if, comparing her times with the men's times, that she would do very well, and that's just purely saying it as it is. And so, I honestly don't think she would should be up there. And actually, just doing a quick search now, so 800 meters. I was correct myself for the record. Second mistake. On the 20th of August, she won gold for the women's 800 at Rio. She won gold with a time of 1:55.28. Now, men's gold medalist at the 800 meters was David Rudisha of Kenya, who won with a winning time of 1:42.15. So you can see the time difference there. That is, if you're running in the open category, I don't know all of the times. I can have a look at the times now. We'll try and quickly find them. But I don't think that. So even in qualification. So qualification. I'm just looking at the qualification results now. Slowest qualification in Heat 1, 1:48.41. We had a 1:50.40 from Bryce Etez from Monaco, a 1:52.76 from Alex Beddoes of the Cook Islands, and Yik Biel from South Sudan, competing for the refugee Olympic team, with a 1:54.67. That's the slowest time of all of the heats. So the slowest time from YKBL beat Caster Semenya's time, gold medal winning time. You create an open category. Um, the people that don't even make it past, I mean, you have to. I don't know how Olympics qualifications works for athletics, but I know that the athletes have to qualify in most sports, and so even the slowest person at the Olympics, at the men's heats, beats the fastest woman. Um, so if we're thinking about, oh, we've got an open category, well, that solves the problem. No, it doesn't. Not necessarily. So then we're going to have to look at, creating tiers. We're going to have to look at creating what would essentially be testosterone tiers. If we're actually going to look for a solution where, if we're inclined to say, well, the women's game, the women's sport is under threat. We need to protect that. Let's move to stop them from competing with the women. Okay, well, then you're just creating. You see what we're doing here? We're creating a marginalized subset, and we're not providing a solution to the issue. We're just saying, well, here's the issue. Let's not solve the problem. So what we're really going to have to start doing, if we're serious about, because a lot of the framing from The Economist, I think, the Economist article, for example, this newspaper believes it's always unfair to allow transgender women to compete in women's sports because of the advantages of male puberty, and that they make a sort of big grand statement. Sports must therefore choose between inclusion and fairness, and they should choose fair play. Well, fair to who? Fair is a subjective term. You can't just say we are being fair, because what do you mean by being fair? Well, you've got someone whose testosterone is naturally too high, and they're still being targeted. It's not fair on that person who just has a naturally high testosterone, let alone people, obviously, that transition. You're protecting it. You're protecting fairness for certain people, not for everyone, because you can't have fairness for everyone. It's just an inherently subjective thing. Your whole saying fair for who is subjective. So let's just say we get rid of men's, replace it with open. That solution doesn't look like it's going to work, and just on the data of Caster Semenya didn't run in 2021 because she refused to take the testosterone suppressants. Her last run, when she won gold, wouldn't have beaten the slowest man. So just going on that sort of that open category doesn't work alone. You can't have dual category. You can't have two categories and expect that to work. So what do we do? Let's try another, the testosterone level categories. Now, this can work in two ways. You can keep men and women, and again, you can have subcategories for testosterone level. So you can have females that qualify. I think the original qualification for trans and athletes with higher testosterone was 10. I think then it went down to 5, and now it's gone down to 2.5, for example. You basically just have categories where people are ranked based on their testosterone level, and that is that's a relatively fair way to do it, and that also keeps the competitiveness, because even if, let's just say, these people are running in the same race, for argument's sake, but then the awards are awarded based on what category you're in. It's like, there are, oh god, I think it's like motor racing. If you watch like touring cars and stuff, and it's a very weird analogy, but it's sort of relevant, I guess. Is that so? The cars have different classifications, like based on the cars that are driving. So you have like different categories, and the prizes are awarded based on each category, because a sports car, if you're running on like the road cars on track, let's just say you have a category of road cars racing in a race. They all race on the same track at the same time, but then they're not necessarily racing each other. So you have category A, which is um, the people with under 10 um, nanomoles per liter of testosterone. Category B, which is under 5. Category A and B may be running on the same track, but when all's said and done at the end of the race, they're not scored together. You have two separate subcategories of the same category. I believe that is a very fair way to do things, and it also ensures that competition is still there without having, and then you can get rid of you don't have to have 500 million races of all different people if you just have them running on the same track. I mean, I understand it's very difficult for all sports. Again, this is not fully fleshed out. I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to provide a solution to something that I think needs a solution and actually needs people to think about, and it certainly needs a discourse on it. So I'm a racing fan. I don't actually watch touring cars, but I'm aware of that sort of element to it. So let's think about that as a solution, and we think about going that way and having these subcategories. Then you can do that for pretty much any sport. Team sports, it's different, but then if once you have the sort of legislation of, okay, this is how we break down subcategories, and the sport can sort of take it how it comes. That's fair. Now, if we're talking about rugby, for example, rugby, one of the sports that banned trans women from playing in the women's game. Now, I can understand why rugby, obviously being a physical sport, there may be a physicality issue, and that comes, not just with the sex in terms of when you're running in the athletics or swimming, you've got a just speed sort of category. There may even be a little bit of physical safety involved there, where even the people that have transitioned, if they've gone through male puberty, they may have a certain level of physicality that the people the women don't have. Sorry, so that could be a safety issue. Again, that's something that where if you have a third category of and I don't want to isolate people, but I do understand that all of these competitions have certain needs for requirements and safety, and again trying to be fair, and I can see in that case why there would need to be a third category. I don't believe the same would have to be said for football though, and I have an example. We have an LGBT transgender women's football team. So I think it was 11 trans women who played. I think they're an amateur women's football team, Dulwich Hamlet. So they're non-league in the men's game, and I think they're amateur in the women's game. But I think that's just to do with the women's game. Obviously, not too as professionalized as the men's game. So I can't really judge the level of quality of where for example Dulwich Hamlet play the non-league level, so they're sort of semi-professional at the men, so I can't really judge with the women where they are. But the trans team lost 7-0, and it was a friendly. It was a sort of a match. It was something to say, look, we can play football. And I think that in this case, that it's interesting to see here whether there is an over powering advantage from trans women playing football, for example. Now, again, I said rugby. My main specification for rugby was actually a matter of safety. Going into the tackles. Physicality. Football, obviously, football is can be a bit of a physical sport. You can have things such as height that come into play, the natural qualifiers that make you better suited for certain positions. However, I believe that the sort of real anything that could be overtly dangerous in rugby doesn't transition over to football. And so I would be interested to see transgender integration into these sports, because that sort of, you know, I mean, I had one example. I couldn't find any other examples, but the fact that, even if this team is an amateur team and they're playing Dulwich Hamlet, let's just say Dulwich Hamlet is semi-professional. I don't know. Let's just say they are. In this case, they lost 7-0. There's, they're not coming in with a massive advantage. They're not coming in and absolutely smoking them out of the pitch. That didn't happen. So, okay, we've got to look at the results, because if you're talking about fairness, you're talking about results, and then so that was specifically with football, and then we've got to come even into the results at recent Olympics with weightlifting, for example. Now, we had Laurel Hubbard, who was a Pacific Games gold medalist, came into the Olympics. A lot of talk about her, as she's transitioned post puberty in weightlifting, and sort of the coming into the sport, coming into the Olympics. Sorry, we had people, someone that seemed a bit more bitter than anything else, and this is just me saying this. So we had former swimmer Sharon Davies questioning the decision, and Sharon Davies apparently was the victim of an East German doping scheme when she was swimming, and lost out to basically unfairness in her sport, and so then hit out at Laurel Hubbard as it being unfair and unbiological. Laurel Hubbard, I think, was the oldest person competing in her category in the weightlifting. So she listed the women's plus 87 kilogram results, and the results, I have them here. She did not finish. She didn't complete a lift. 14th, or technically DNFs, but she was behind Mongolian Bilek Saikan Denabat, who managed to lift 203. So, not a straight advantage. And again, you could say, well, this is only one example, but we need some sort of litmus test in sport. And maybe, obviously, people use Casta Semenya is back in one of the reasons why I mentioned her today is because she's back in the sort of the discourse, because of she's used as a litmus test of someone having more testosterone and having an advantage. That's the sort of reason why she comes back into the conversation. She didn't win. She won silver at the 2012 Olympics. I was just reading there. So she's not overall dominance in the sport. And so you sort of have to say, okay, we're working on what is essentially a scientific level, but also a theoretical level. Because we have testosterone gives advantage, protect the women's sport. Okay, that can work in theory, but the reason why we then need to talk about it in principle is because we can look at what's happening anywhere below, because there's a lot of double gold from Laurel Hubbard at the Pacific Games. We can look at a lot of this and say, we also have here, this is from a Wired article, college senior CC Telfer became the NCAA Division II National Championship in the 400 meter. This is specifically transgender athletes doing well. Terry Miller won the girls 200 meter dash. We can say, okay, you have at a low level transgender athletes doing well, and for me, and just how I view sport, that has to translate at the top level to warrant major change. And I know this sounds like, I don't know, maybe even a bit crazy, but I would rather have an Olympics in the like I'd rather have an Olympics where the athletics is absolutely dominated by a transgender athlete to not to prove the theory because and I know it's sort of like you know um trial I believe more in trial and error than trying to stop something before it happens because it may never happen. And I use Laurel Hubbard as an example because Laurel Hubbard she may do well in the Pacific Games, the inter-regional games, but she didn't win. I mean, she's older, that's fair, but she didn't win at the Olympics, so she doesn't even age still played a factor into her not winning. And in this case, and so I think, in my personal opinion, and how I would rather perceive sport coming into this, I would rather we have the theory acknowledged, but then we have some kind of like test. We have some kind of trial by fire where if we have a year, we have an Olympics where in the athletics they go, okay, um, you're free to do what you want. Let's go ahead and see how well you actually do in the sport at the highest level, because it's no good saying, oh well, they're doing well. Transgender athletes are doing well at a national level, so we have to stop them in the Olympics because you don't know, you know, you can't measure competition unless if you're talking about competition at the highest level, you can't use competition at the level below that to justify at the highest level. They're not the same thing. I can't say, oh, Laurel Hubbard won 2 gold medals at the Pacific Games, therefore she's just a shoo-in for the Olympics. That's not how it works, and that's what we saw. You know, she was still competitive um, at her age at the Pacific Games, and I'll have a look at when the Pacific Games were, where she took gold at the Pacific Games and didn't take gold at the Olympics. And I'm stressing this argument because this is the only. So she took gold at the Pacific in um, plus 87, 87 kilograms in 2019 in Apia in Samoa. She won the Commonwealth Weightlifting Championships in 2019 and 2017 Gold Coast Commonwealth Weightlifting Championships. Um, so this is the Pacific Games is interregional. The Commonwealth, obviously, wide range of different countries compete in that. So it's an international competition, but again, not at the highest. The Commonwealth is not the highest level. So yeah, she qualifies for the Olympics. She's clearly a good weightlifter, but she's not the best weightlifter. And I understand, and I believe in relativity. And what I would love, if anyone has any other example, I'm sticking with Laurel Hubbard because it's the only example I'm familiar with. Oh, well, because I know that Laurel Hubbard was the first openly transgender woman to compete in the Olympic Games. So I don't actually think there may not actually be another example, which probably should have prefaced that at the beginning. But this is what we have to use the examples we're given. Because I'm an individualist when it comes to sport, in the fact that I believe that a lot of domination is made possible in the individual sense, and for individual sports, obviously not for team sports, but just to clarify, that there's more factors than just what people have been saying. The biology, the testosterone level. I think there are more factors, and I don't think that an untrained trans woman could beat any of the women that qualify for the Olympics. I don't think that's a particularly provocative statement for me to say, but we have one example, and I'm hedging my bets on one example because I want to see more. Not that I want to be proven wrong, because I'm not coming in with any assertions. I want to see what happens. I want practicality over theory, and the reason why is because I don't believe you can justify decisions with theory that impact things so greatly. I would rather, one person win by such a margin that you have to say, okay, well, maybe there is an advantage here. I'd rather have that definitive proof, because you can't prove anything by hypothesizing, and you can't prove anything by saying, well, you've done well in the the lower levels, so therefore this is proof, because it's not proof, because um if it's not translating into the highest levels, um it's not it's you know not necessarily um the way to go is making um that definitive statement. Sorry, I'm looking now at the women's uh women's weightlifting. I do not understand the scoring. Yeah, I have no idea how. Oh, here's so Laurel Hubbard reached 268 kilograms, and the woman below her, Thea Geiger Stowers from Samoa, was 261 kilograms. If I'm reading the results right, it's on Wikipedia. It's in this weird chart that I think goes in order of how they lifted. So people drop out, and obviously then they go up, and because I think you can lift 268 successfully, and then move up if you're trying to break a record. Like you can win and then go for a world record. I don't know how weightlifting works specifically. I try and watch every event at least once when the Olympics is on, but not an expert. So just trying to read this chart. So just what 7 kgs ahead, but then the gap between second and third was 6 kilograms. So Thea Geiger Stowers beat fellow Samoan Ianiara Sipaya. Ian Sipaya. Ian. Oh, I'm not going to try that again. Sorry. Reached 255 kilograms. So we have a gap in class between first, second, and third. It's a marginal gap either way. So I'm just trying to on the top of my head look at the statistics and go, well, here's the data we have. This is winning the Commonwealth. This is in the Commonwealth Championships, and it in the women's sport it seems to be dominated by the Pacific region anyway, because we have a New Zealander, a Samoan, and an Australian women. There's 4 different, So the top 4 that I can see from this chart were all from the Pacific anyway. So providing extra context to Laurel Hubbard's success, she won the Pacific Games. She's done well in the Pacific Games, and at the same time, the Pacific seems to be a good region for women's weightlifting in the Commonwealth. That doesn't mean that it's a good lifting for good for women internationally. The gold medalist in Laurel Hubbard's category in Tokyo was Chinese. Interestingly, silver was British. Bronze was American. 4th place Korean. So the top 4, one person that comes from the Commonwealth. Don't remember seeing Emily J. Campbell in the Commonwealth results, so could have been outside the top 4. I think I was seeing there. So context is key. I'm a massive fan of context. Absolutely love it. And I know this seems. Know that the sports are not comparable. You can't just go around comparing every single sport. But if we're using weightlifting is the only litmus test we have, and if we're seeing, we're not seeing the domination. Okay, we're not seeing the domination yet. We may see it, but that's what I'd like everyone to keep an open mind on. And so then we go to the sort of second half of this conversation, which is actually the discourse on it in general. So we have swimming and athletics and rugby with the free sports taking active decisions on it. And then we had a transgender athlete research paper rejected. So Dr. John Armstrong of King's College London wrote a project proposal. This is not even it's not an actual paper yet. It's just a project proposal. So I'm saying this is probably a couple thousand words, a couple of pages of proposed research that he wanted to get into, and it was rejected um, by the university. Now, the headline from the Telegraph article, which I can't read because the Telegraph articles are locked behind a paywall. So I'll just read I can only read the title, which is Transgender Athlete Research Rejected After Professor Calls Trans Women Males. The university, in a rejection letter, said that the language used in the application was not sensitive. That's what they lead with. I did manage to glitch and see the article earlier, and I believe that they mentioned that it's suppression of free speech. However, I have an article from Pink News, which I guess is the the other side of the Telegraph. Obviously, going to take the stance of, well, this doctor knows what he's talking about. This doctor has been on GB News, so we have a certain political stance coming into it. I don't believe that should ever be used to argue against someone's academic writing. But regardless, this has it sort of comes with the territory with all this. And this is why the culture war becomes so damning, because it comes with the territory of the culture war politicizes things that really we should have really been trying to not make political, but because we have this preposterous idea that we're in some kind of culture war rather than culture discourse, much nicer term. It's probably what we should be sticking with. We're digging our own graves. Anyway, the Pink News article headline sets the tone. Bias research proposal rejected after professor calls trans women male. So, the KCL, King's College London, professor Dr John Armstrong, his research was rejected because the rejection was bias identified by officials. So I don't actually know what he's a doctor of. I'd assume some kind of biology, or he is. I don't know if that's the same person. What? He's a reader in financial mathematics. If this is the same person, I honestly have no clue why. See, it looks like the same person from the picture. I've just discovered that now. This is like, my raw reaction. If you are a mathematician, and I understand then, like, he'd be going down the data route, but then he's also not a scientist. So what, if we're talking, if the main rejection, this is obviously very topical to the athletics decision. Their thing is based on biology, and you've got the person that's writing a research paper as a mathematician. Now, I've got nothing wrong with a mathematician writing this research paper, because you want interdisciplinary approaches, but then the nuanced take on that is, well, you're not a biologist, so you can't claim to be coming at it from a biological perspective. You're a financial mathematician, probably a lot of statistics involved. Financial mathematics, geometry, and stochastics, and collective pensions. If this is the same person, because that name came up straight away when I found the person's Twitter. Yep, I found the person's Twitter. Again, wow, this podcast is really at the end. It's peaking at the end because you're getting my live reaction. This person who wanted to write the article is a reader in financial mathematics. Now, again, I have no problem with that. Are also interested in academic freedom and a more sane approach to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So, interested, you're academically a doctor in mathematics. I don't know what a doctor in mathematics is because I I don't know what a doctor in mathematics is. You know, in terms of like there are specific. If you don't know, just to contextualize, there are specific different types of doctorates you can get. So you can actually be like a doctor. You can get a DPhil, which is a doctor in philosophy. I have no other knowledge of. I'm assuming you can be a doctor in the sciences. Um, this is just off the top of my head. Anyway, there are different types of doctors that you get at university, and obviously that depends on what letters you actually get after your name, and they're department based, so they're subject based. So, for example, I'm in the humanities. If I was to get a doctorate, I would get a DPhil. I wouldn't be a doctor. I wouldn't be a doctor in mathematics. I would be a doctor in philosophy. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that's what if I applied for a PhD, that's what I would get. So it matters in the fact that because you can call yourself a doctor, and you could be a doctor from my personal perspective, I do ancient history. If I wrote my PhD thesis on something in ancient history, I'm still a doctor. I can call myself a doctor. And then in this article, Dr. John Armstrong writing about this, if his doctorate is in mathematics, it makes it sound it's slightly inherently misleading. Which doesn't mean that you can't write about things, but interestingly, from the point of not rejection, sorry, no, I'm objecting, same thing. From the point of starting with what's wrong with this, and I'll get into this in a second. So there was a bias identified with the research paper. I'm assuming it was the academics get paid for research. I'm assuming this wanted it to be funded by the university. It was rejected, and well, now this makes sense. As these are quotings from the rejection letter. Oh, the rejection letter was obtained by the Telegraph. Hey ho, like behind a paywall. The language is not sensitive, and misgendering of athletes is not appropriate. That's a quotation. Again, another quotation from the letter. It has an obvious bias towards rejecting trans women in female sports, because just for those that don't know, you can conclude your research or set to prove something in a research, but if before you've carried out the research, if your proposal has an obvious bias, you basically are going to be accused of finding the answer before actually conducting the research, which is what is really meant by an obvious bias there. So, for example, I mean, I'm not a researcher, so this is just from my midway. I'm not a lay person with academia, but I'm also not a researcher specifically. So I've never really had to write a proper research proposal, but just sort of understanding what would be meant by obvious bias is that when you're conducting research, you're looking to answer a question or you're looking to prove a hypothesis, and you have to be open to some extent to be not getting it wrong, but you have to be flexible, because that's the whole point of research, is that you're going to adapt what you're looking at initially. What you're saying at the start, I mean, may turn out to be true in the way that you thought. It may turn out to be partially true, or it may turn out to be not true. And that's what you've got as a researcher. You've got to be able to have your own starting hypothesis challenged by your findings. So if the project is written, in a very unseemingly compromising way, that's going to happen. That you're going to be accused of having an obvious bias. And the last, and I'd say arguably most damning, and now considering this guy as a mathematician, probably the most relevant. There's very little scientific reasoning underpinning the hypothesis. And that's quite interesting, because obviously we've just been talking about pretty much very much based on testosterone, and that statement is linked on the Pink News article. With the trans swimming ban was based on opinion, not science, according to a researcher from Sydney, or told the Sydney Morning Herald. Wow, this is like link after link of quoting. This is like just embedded in different articles. So endocrinologist Dr. Ada Chung told the Sydney Morning Herald that the Finna's decision was actually based more on opinion than science. So, well, what I've just been saying about the fact that there's no solution being made, there's no solution being offered except for the flat ban from athletics, and the open category from swimming, for example. Well, that's what they aim to do. I don't think there's one just yet. It very much seems like they're. I was almost sort of thinking to myself, and again, this is sort of my live reaction to this, so just sort of processing it, but um, I was very much thinking to myself, well, this is quite interesting because it definitely seems, if you're basing things off of science, you can, as I suggested earlier, you can do subcategories very easily because if you're making a decision to exclude people because of their level of testosterone, you know what you're excluding people on, and you know why you're excluding them. So just make subcategories. That's fine. But if it's a reaction to, if they're trying to gauge the sentiment on transgender people in sport, then you're an idiot. Like, are you? I mean, that's very hypercritical of me, but honestly, like, this is what I was saying. It's like there's no litmus test in professional athletics. At the Olympics, for example, there's no litmus test. There's so where is that coming from other than either scientific theory or from the opinion of this person, not even scientific theory. We're at slightly different levels of positions here. Interesting, definitely a conversation in its own right. um but that's quite interesting. However, just to return to the paper, um and actually, the fact that there is very little scientific reasoning, there is quite interesting position at the moment. So the board recommended that Armstrong contact the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team in efforts to retract the anti-trans bias with the research. They didn't say, no, you can't write this research. They just wanted an amended proposal. And he came out swinging. He said the KCO professor accused the university of preventing him from using the concept of sex at all. He said he's not misgendering any individuals, he's just accurately using the term male and female, and he's being blocked from conducting research, and it's impacting on his academic freedom. He claimed that KCO is undermining credibility of research in general, and that no serious work has been done by the various federations to try and find out opinions of people in athletics, both at the grassroots and elite athletes. Well, so basically, he's saying, I'm going to conduct my research on opinions and look at what people are saying. It's valid research, in terms of what he's doing. So the first thing is, and then the Pink article basically outlines that the guy's been retweeting gender exclusionary feminists and highlights that the doctor is basically it implies that this doctor is on the feminist side of trans exclusionarianism, if we think about them as schools of thought. So that's what it suggested at the end of the end of the piece. Skipping over that because I personally don't believe that things that are done on the on Twitter, for example, should be read into someone's research overly, because you don't necessarily, like, if it's inherently actually, you're coming into this now then. I would have rather this person was allowed to conduct this research, and the reason why is because the criticisms that are given by the council of research officials that rejected the proposal are like an assist for an academic that is trying to counteract this narrative. Because what's happened is that the guy, I mean, I don't know, I don't know if he's well, he's got. Let's just say he's gone to the Telegraph. The Telegraph have his rejection letter. So let's just say he's gone to cry wolf to the Daily Telegraph, and he said, my research is being suppressed." Well, his research has been rejected. The grounds are okay; they're there, but you don't even need to do that. Literally, if this guy publishes his research and it comes up, let's just say his thesis was never rejected, and he writes a 20-page paper. For argument's sake, it's a journal research. I don't know what if he's trying to write a monograph, or let's just say he's writing a paper. He's writing, typically it's 20 to 40 pages, and you can overall you can get from it that there is no scientific reasoning. It's pretty much based on people's opinions. That is meat and drink for someone that's writing an academic paper saying, well, this look at the research that's being done here. This person's just looking at opinions. That's not science. You don't need to stop someone from doing because the guy can then just go, well, I'll just do the research for a newspaper, or just go to the Telegraph and say, well, this is the research I want to do because no meaningful research has been done to pundits and athletes. Like he can do that elsewhere. And this is the thing that I think I said in my first episode. The issue between I was talking about identity specifically. We have an issue between academia and the media and like newspapers, for example. The guy's gone to cry wolf to the Telegraph, and the reason why I'm saying it like that, and I know it sounds disparaging, is because well, he's a financial mathematician doing research on people's opinions. Like in terms of specialization to carry out a specific task of research, obviously this guy probably has experience, and I mean, just said from his Twitter bio that he's interested in the the area of academic, essentially with academic free speech. So it's an area of interest. But it seems to be slightly more journalistic than academic. And what I'm saying by that is that if you're writing an academic paper about this, what you really should be like, you should have a checklist of things you need to outline. You need to outline what you're talking about. You need to outline why you're talking about it. Are we actually, because here's the thing, if what the person from that said to the Sydney Morning Herald said that well, this is based on opinion. Well, you could literally write an academic paper, and you could use this guy. Let's just say this guy collected what would essentially be a paper compiling and then analyzing the opinions of people. You could use that to compare opinions and science. Let the guy do his work, because the guy will only just be contributing to a discourse. Either way, is going to contribute to the discourse, because shutting him down from actually having the ability to have the discussion in the first place, well, firstly, that doesn't help anyone because you've just shut him down. Secondly, you've not stopped the discourse because he's just gone to the Telegraph and said exactly the same thing that he wanted to do anyway, and he's not going to really stop. I mean, he'll probably stop the research because he's not getting paid to do it, but he's not going to stop having that interest. Like, we have to understand that academia, the media as well, but the media doesn't play ball ever because there is no discourse in the media. It's just people quoting other people, and they're never actually having a conversation. They're just talking. They're shooting into a void, both on one side and the other, about what the other person is saying, and there's a big brick wall in between. But in academia, that shouldn't happen. But you're going to let the guy do it, because if you let the guy write the article, you can criticize it, you can cite it, you can write a counter argument article, and you can say, well, this guy published this article, let's just say he got the research grant, he publishes it next year, and actually early in 2023, he publishes it 6 months down the line. You can write a counter argument and cite it and go, well, here's what this guy has said, and here's what the swimming community did, here's what the athletics community did, and here's the opinions, and then you cite a scientist. Then you cite someone who's an expert in testosterone and its effect in sport, and then you have true interdisciplinary contribution. And I think the issue is that you're either scared of the result it's going to give you, but I don't think that's the case because you've already had scientists criticizing the decision. Obviously, scientists can have opinions themselves. Nothing is they're reacting to data. That's the data is true. The analysis of the data is not necessarily true. Um, so scientists can have opinions, but the very fact that there's an opinion there in the first place shows that it's not an open and closed book. When the athletics body took the decision a couple of days ago, that's not an open and closed book. I mean, they said as much, but even at the point of taking the decision, it's not an open and closed book. You're like taking a decision in the middle of an argument, and oh, we're going to keep having the argument, but this is the decision for now. It's like, well, okay, you've solved nothing. Well done, great job on you. But that's important because that's something to go on, and it's something to go on. This should definitely happen in academia. Obviously, it doesn't happen in the media because of what I've just said, because Pink News and the Telegraph are going to be talking to two different audiences. I can't even read the Telegraph's article, so I don't know what they're saying, but I can see what Pink News is saying, and I can see that the majority of the people, I'm going to, make a bold statement and say 90%, probably even 95% of the people that read Pink News's article on the subject won't read the Telegraph's article on the subject, and vice versa. And that is media. Academia should be interdisciplinary, and everyone should be reading that article and using it as a leapfrog point to either, if you want to double down on Dr. Armstrong's claims, you can, and if you want to criticize him, you can do that as well. Like, the development of academia should not become like the development of news. The development of academia should be leapfrogging off of other people. It should be evolutionary. News is not evolutionary. News is like proper rabbit hole, saying what the person wants to hear, or like you read the news that says what you want to hear, not the news is saying what you want to hear. Like, you agree with the news that you read, and you don't challenge yourself. Academia should be challenging everyone that reads it, and people should be counter arguing something. If I write an academic piece and someone counter argues me, that's okay because that's discourse. I may not agree with them, but it's in the discourse, and then someone can read both pieces and go, well, I want this or I want this, and it's cited and it's linked. But it doesn't happen in the media, and we shouldn't let academia get like that. Let the guy write his paper, then criticize it, then have an academic say it's not good. You can, or you say, oh yeah, you can conduct this research, but we're gonna make you co-write something alongside this person who disagrees with you. Knock your socks off. Write two sides to the same story. Present it that way. I don't really think they make academics do that, because that must be like torture trying to write. I can imagine trying to write with someone that you just vehemently disagree with. But you write counter arguments. You're playing counter arguments. I mean, they already have counter arguments. There's very little scientific reading. They've read the proposal. They know that when you make a proposal, you have citations. You have the theory or the science that you're looking to base it off. They know exactly where he's come. You can tell that mile off, especially in this sort of research. If he's coming, he'll have a bibliography, so he'll have a reading list. They'll know exactly what he's reading, what he's looking at, where he's going. If that's not there, let it not be there. But let it get published. Let it highlight the weakness of this side. Don't shut it down just because. I mean, again, like I said, not a researcher, but I would rather this guy from maths come out with his opinion, put some research down, and then progress the conversation, rather than this conversation. The conversation that should have had as a reaction to the paper come out is now happening on two different media channels. So we've missed a chance for a discourse in academia, and instead we've got discourse happening in the news where it's not really a discourse because it's two news sites saying different things. That is very, very interesting, highlighting to me the sort of same issues that I've been bringing up with the sort of academic approaches people are taking. I hope you enjoyed today's even longer podcast. They're getting longer and longer. Soon you're going to have to, start getting your tents out and camping overnight. That doesn't make any sense. I don't even know what I'm saying. I've gone doolally. I'm always I'm doolally already, but I'm even more doolally after speaking for an hour and 15 minutes. I've gone nuts. I'm gonna be committed right at the end of this. Someone's just gonna come and take me away. The second this gets uploaded, gone. I've been sent out into the wilderness. I will stop dragging the outro on any longer than it needs to be. Yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. Again, these topics aren't seemingly popping up thick and fast. I think there's definitely a lot to go on. Doing this weekly, and I really, really can't wait to be making more of these podcasts, because I feel like we're covering a lot of different topics as well. Trying to look at this weekly again, as I've said. If you guys have any suggestions, if you guys want any one-offs, any specific topics that you guys want analysed, let me know, and I will look into that for you. But leaving this here, I bid you adieu. Thank you very much for making it this far. And as always, I hope to see you guys listening to the next one. And if you want to have a discussion, let's take it down to the comments. Thank you very much. Have a good one.